Hello, welcome everyone. So I have no idea whether we'll be able to hear responses from you all. I think we were told that you all are able to come off of mute and to utilize your cameras for this session. So if that's possible, please feel free to do so and introduce yourselves, say hello, and we can get started here in just a minute or two as we wait for more folks to join the room. And if you cannot hear me, then I will put it in the chat. But we just wanted to know who all is here. So feel free to put, if you can't come off of video or come onto video or unmute, please feel free to just say hello in the chat box. Greetings, Ray. Greetings, Minnie. So OCS in North Carolina, whereabouts is OCS in North Carolina? Like whereabouts in the state are you? Eflin? Okay. I went to school in Chapel Hill. So I used to always ride by Eflin. I think that's going to Greensboro. Yeah. Welcome, Sherry. I know y'all's area well. Spent a couple of years in that little slice of heaven known as Chapel Hill. Welcome. We'll get started in just a second. Aurelio, I think let's not waste too much time. You want to just do a quick introductions for you and I, and then we can get into some conversation about what we're going to do and be available to answer questions about. But go ahead and start with an introduction, and then I'll go after you.
Good afternoon. I'm Aurelio Montemayor, staff member at the Intercultural Development Research Association. The major area of emphasis I work in is family engagement with special focus on family leadership and education. Been with the Equity Center for quite a while. So Terrence, take it on.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Terrence Wilson. I am our Regional Policy and Community Engagement Director at IDRA. I also do a lot of work with our EAC-South, doing trainings and other kinds of technical assistance throughout the South. And so we've actually worked with some other schools in North Carolina around some training, and glad to be working with you all in Texas and all other areas of folks that will join us via recording. And so the purpose of this conversation is to talk a little bit about oh, hello. Hi, Minnie. Thank you for coming on video. And we're gonna let you, since you can come on. We won't even get into what we're doing here yet. We'll let you tell us where you are, what you do.
Let me see if I can figure out
in North Carolina. We can hear you and
you
see you. So you can just talk. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, good afternoon and greetings to everyone. I just kind of figured out how to get on video. But I am currently the principal at Eflin Sheets Global Elementary School.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And then Sherry said I don't know if it's Sherry or Cherie, either one, said that you are both an educator and a parent. So welcome to the conversation. So as we're, and welcome Christopher as well, who's the executive director of a regional service agency and a parent. So good. I like that you all are putting your multiple hats that you wear in relation to education, right? It's often not just we work in education. We often have family members, kids, or we've got other family, right? Nieces, nephews, what have you, in the school system. And so part of what we're going to talk about today is how we can make sure that the voices of those other folks in the community are valued and are a part of the ongoing policy and practice at the school. And so IDRA has been doing this work for a long time, and Aurelio will give you a little bit of kind of our history around education cafes in particular. And we'll talk a little bit about our particular model, but I think that, we want this to be a question and answer session. So we won't do too much presentation. We will get to some questions once we do a little bit of just talking in the beginning. And we want to hear from you, right? Part of, and welcome Chastity from Alaska. Welcome to the conversation. Part of this conversation is we want you all to be able to hear from each other, right? This convening is not just for talking heads like us to talk to you. We also want you to be able to connect and share your experiences and your successes and your challenges, right? And see if you can help one another. And so we will start with just a quick, kind of conversation around the history and kind of how we approach education cafes, what they are. And you all should have access to some handouts in the chat, or I think they're in the chat next to the chat button. You should have something there that says handout, so you can read a little bit more around, one, our approach to family engagement, and two, how we particularly talk about our education cafes. But let's just get into some just brief history. And like I said, Aurelio, we won't talk for long, but since you've been here doing this work for quite some time, why don't you tell the folks on our chat a little bit more about our approach to family engagement through ed cafes?
Are we going to have the visuals on this?
Or just, no, I think we're just talking this time.
Okay, so somewhere around 1980, I started as a high school English teacher in 1964, so I've been around. I've taught in public schools, but as an advocate within IDRA that I joined some years back, we started focusing on family engagement and quickly saw that there are the kinds of family involvement activities that are traditional and what we saw as more important in terms of what we needed to see in terms of family advocacy for education. So in our experience with working with parents in many different settings, mostly parents in Title I schools, parents who are either economically disadvantaged, of color, recent immigrant, or all of the above, it was clear that the traditional models were not effective for what we saw was needed. The traditional, for example, organization that is for volunteering and fundraising has an excellent history. PTA is the oldest family engagement organization in education in this country. But the general direction is for the parent to offer time and support, which many parents are willing to do. But there's very limited focus on those families understanding and influencing policy and practice. Another aspect of family engagement has been parenting, or how to be a better parent, and it's quite worthy of itself, whether it's how the parent can help with the homework. There's a general notion that poor families and families that are of color need to do a lot more teaching of the child at home somehow. And so sometimes it's seen through a deficit lens, fixing the broken family so that they can help their kids. We don't necessarily like that. We don't think it has much effect, but that's the parenting one. And there's a lot of parents that want the parenting classes, but again, it's an individual kind of improvement so that I can help my children do well or be better children or grow up to be successful adults. A third aspect of family engagement has been self-development. And there have been periods when there's federal money for adult education. And so it could be anywhere from self-development in terms of getting a GED, high school diploma, English as a second language, literacy, or self-defense, growing flowers at home. In other words, it's a whole array of self-development improvement kinds of services, and some districts still do offer that. In the case of these first three strands in parent engagement, they're all worthy of what they do and their goals, but none of them have a primary focus of families having leadership and understanding in policy and practice. So under the umbrella term of leadership, we have been evolving over the last 45 years in terms of our work with families. Number one, that's site-specific, that helps families connect with each other around having an excellent neighborhood public school, and taking on projects to actually improve the education, but as an independent, or at least an equal with school people in terms of working towards having an excellent school. And so that in a nutshell is where we are. We call it Education Café these days. It was for a while, it was called a PTA Comunitario because we were hoping to have a new model for PTA in terms of how they do their family engagement. In any case, we have examples of families that are poor, families that don't speak English, families of color who come together and in fact can influence policy and practice. And so we've been experiencing it in Texas over the last 6 to 8 months with our legislature that meets once every 2 years. And we've had families being able to give testimony, to inquire about different education issues they're concerned about. With COVID, the concern in terms of the digital gap that many families have been experiencing, all those issues that families have opinions about and have interest in improving are the kinds of issues we're dealing with. So that's where we are right now in a nutshell.
Thank you for that, Aurelio. I mean, I think, we'd love to hear from other folks, right? Kind of if you all have similar, hi, Samantha, conceptions around family leadership, right? Aurelio mentioned the 4 different ways of engaging with families, right? And we're really focusing on leadership. And we're curious if other folks have a similar focus on, building leadership skills around policy and practice with their own communities, or if that's something that you all have interest in. And just tell us a little bit about what brought you into this session to learn more about our education cafes. We want to hear from you. There's not too many of us. Dora said she has no sound.
To speak or to hear?
Can you not hear us, or you can't speak out? And Minnie came off of can't want the video earlier in this session, so I know she can.
Yes.
So I'm gonna call you out just because. So in your work, and everyone, feel free to put on we can just have a conversation. In your work that you do with your parents at the elementary level, are you having these conversations around being leaders and being able to set policy and practice, or is it a different kind of engagement?
So one of the first things I'm trying, well, good afternoon, everybody, now that I can see everybody, but one of the first things that I am trying to get to is getting people to come to the table. I think that my family, at least for me, my families have been inundated with so much information. They've had to really be a true teacher and educator in the past year, 2 years. And so there's a fatigue that I'm seeing. And so while I'm asking for feedback, while I am trying to figure out what it is that they need from the school, it's hard to get them to come back to the table and have a seat and have that discussion. And it's also hard to bring. It's challenging to bring people to the table or families to the table who are really still navigating some traumatic experiences. And so what I'm thinking about is how can I set it up such that I'm getting the perspectives, I'm getting the information, but I'm not yet another burden in trying to kind of chop up their very busy and full lives. But I feel like I need information from them about the barriers um, that they might be facing or are hitting regarding uh, giving input on policies, giving input on all these things, because they don't have time to read all that stuff. They don't have, and a lot of my parents and families, when I do like corner them and talk to them like they're dropping something off or coming to pick something up, I do. It's like they were like, I didn't even get that from that. I'll mention a certain email or communication, and they were like, well, I didn't understand. I didn't understand what that was. And so I want to know how I can do a better job as a school to create the space where folks can come and
No,
contribute.
those. Thank you for sharing that perspective, and it really is important to remember that families as an entity that we want to engage with to give us information and to help us make decisions. Right, they are comprised of individuals who are dealing with real stuff over the past year, whether it be economic distress, health challenges, trauma in all these different ways. Right, and so I think one of the things that is important for leadership, and Aurelio can talk more about this, is like that sense of empowerment that comes with being a part of the solutions, right? Because oftentimes it can be a one-way communication. Tell us what issues you're having, and then let us give you some kind of intervention or support or something. And so I think the part of the education cafe model that we really like is, one, having an intermediary, right, working through a community-based organization, an organization like IDRA, to kind of help be an intermediary between the families and the school, right? That it's not so transactional, and then having them be able to be a part of that solution in a two-way kind of communication, where not only they're telling you what is needed, but also they're involved in that whatever that intervention is. They get to choose: do we want focus on broadband? Do we want to focus on extracurriculars? Do we want to focus on algebra 2 as a whatever it is, right? And I think that that's something that can continue to bring value, right? Because when we have conversations, Aurelio and I talk with families often, part of what the value is when we say, what do you like about coming to this, is that they feel listened to, they feel heard, and they feel empowered. And it's really not just about their one student, it's about that school community, the community that they live in, their neighborhood, right? That's what we're trying to build. And that kind of sense of, we feel it in the work that we do. This is kind of what keeps me coming to work, is that sense of value and feeling important, that I'm making a positive change. And granted, like, that's not going to get you all the way there if you've got some other challenges that you're dealing with, right? If you don't have a job, or if you're, you got to shuffle things, that sense of empowerment might not get you all the way there. But for the folks who have the capacity, that's something that we can see that keeps them engaged. Aurelia, did you have a comment on that?
One of the things we've learned during the pandemic is how important face-to-face is. All of a sudden, we were connecting to families through Zoom and similar tools. So, Minnie, first of all, I want to support you in your search for authentic communication. It's labor-intensive and important. Where I see us in a dilemma right now is that we were able at IDRA to continue the relationship of those who we were already in a relationship with before the pandemic, before the isolation. It's really hard to bring families together with each other in a Zoom session as a first encounter. So what I'm looking forward to is after we can start meeting face to face safely, that we help families connect with each other, because as long as it's me, the one giving the service and listening, it's still a family relating to the service provider, the school. What we're looking for is families connecting with each other around the education of their children and listening to each other, because that critical dialogue is important. So in the meantime, I think continuing to connect with however we can, knowing that there's a digital divide, that some families have many other things on the plate, at least that they know that somebody persists in asking them. I think that's important, Minnie. So continue what you're doing. It's labor intensive.
And I was wondering, and thinking about that piece about connecting families about, and I'm going to talk with our equity leader here in the district. I've already mentioned it to her about how to develop like either family academies or affinity groups for families so that they can kind of create a space for families to come together. And maybe I'm at the beginning and I disconnect, but create a space where families can log on and talk together and meet and talk about similar experiences or happenings or challenges, things of that nature, and kind of go about it that way as well.
I think you're right on the right target, a right strat. One of the dilemmas we have as school people, as soon as we have parents gathered, is we have a lot of information. We want to give them questions they want to ask about some survey we're doing. So as long as you facilitate it so that families learn to dialogue with each other, support each other, and we are there as in the presence of their conversation, as opposed to somebody who has to deliver a message.
I love that. And Christopher, I saw that you were chiming in the chat. I wanted to see if you wanted to come off of mute and tell us a little bit about kind of what you've seen, how it can work in action.
Yeah, so thank you. So just to give you a little background, we're a regional service agency in northeastern PA. We're an intermediate unit, so we provide services to within counties, and our IU in particular provides services to direct services to probably about close to 9,000 children with disabilities. So certainly, for a family member to have a child with a disability, their needs, their concerns, their hopes, their dreams can be a lot different than a person that doesn't have a child with a disability. So a lot of times our staff maybe aren't looking at things through the lens of that family. And, there needs to be opportunities for us to kind of lean in and listen about the services we're providing. And are we meeting those needs? Are we providing the supports that you need? Are we helping you to achieve the goals that you have for your children, that you have for yourself? And what kind of started here in our region was a couple parents, or I should say, a couple family members, because sometimes you have parents, but you also have grandparents. But they reached out to me as the executive director and had some concerns about some of the services we're providing and maybe not meeting their needs effectively. And they took a risk because they kind of shared they were worried about the response. And I kind of leaned in and I listened, and I started meeting on on a monthly basis with these families, just one-on-one and listening. And what it led to was a creation of what we call the IU20 parent team support group. And when we say team, we include team as families and school personnel. So we have frequent engagements where sometimes we have a topic and we let the families ask us questions, and we answer questions. We listen to things that we can improve upon, and then go back to the table and try to make improvements. Other times we hear the families say, we'd like some training or support in this area. We provide that training and support through family engagement activities. But the other really cool thing is there is also times for the families just to be with families. And it's so powerful because they're now coming together as a unit, and they're doing activities together. So they're doing community events. We have a local baseball team. We have a local hockey team. So we partner with those organizations to do like family nights, and the kids and the families are coming out and they're building relationships with one another. So for our families that had disabilities that in some ways felt very siloed and isolated, they now see that they have other people and friends that they can connect to. And it has been 100% positive. It's improved our services. It's improving our connections and our relationships with our families. And we're starting to work together as a unit. And it's just paying off big time, and certainly paying off for the kids so they're successful. So everything you guys are talking about, I've seen it in action. It works, and it's a lot of work. And also sometimes it stings a little bit when a family member tells you the way that you're providing a program or service maybe isn't working really well. But it's not an area to judge or say you're doing something wrong. It's a way to continually improve our services so that we're working with our families effectively. So it's all good stuff.
Yeah,
Chris, I think that's really good. If at some point the families communicating with each other about an issue they have in common, then they can have a project. In other words, they start finding across families that there's a particular issue that children with special needs have, that they have an issue about. Excellent. It's very good. Very good.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Aurelio. Is it flows very nicely into kind of the next phase of the leadership thing, which is like choosing a project, which is based in policy, right? Oftentimes you'll have a super involved parent that you'll have for a couple of years, right? While their child is in whatever stage you are, middle school, high school, elementary. And then that issue will resurface, right, when that parent is not there. So one of the things that we like to try to have folks do is focusing on what policies and practices are in place that are creating some of these, issues. And really, we're looking at an equity standpoint, right? So some marginalized students, students that have limited resources, racial, ethnic minority students. And so figuring out what are some of those policies and practices and how you change them. Because I think, sometimes our families, if they get that problem solved for their one child, they're happy. Right. And we want it to move further beyond that, because we know that if some of these things are in policy and practice, they're going to persist beyond that individual family. So I think that having them involved in an education project is a little bit of a different skill, right? You have to learn about how to look at data, how to collect data, how to do surveys with your fellow family members, right? How do you present those things in a meeting to your principal, your school board? There are some different, skills involved in that advocacy on a project basis than would be involved on that interpersonal kind of advocacy for your own student. And so I think we're always kind of focused on system change and policy change. And I think that's one of the next steps that you can, be thinking about to institutionalize some of these positive things that you see happening, right? Because there's a great, for example, we saw a lot of increased engagement during the pandemic. Folks were going to neighborhoods. Folks were out and, had the bus out and going to door, right? But that's not a policy, right? We're going to revert without policy change to those same kind of disconnected practices that we had before the pandemic. So that's just one example. There are many others, and really thinking about how we can institutionalize some of these changes to bring our families in. And then, these are things that's going to keep folks involved. It's going to keep benefiting the school district going forward. So yes, also, Sherry, we see that you're here with us. Did you want to tell us a little bit about kind of how family leadership and family engagement works from your perspective and your vantage at your school and your school district?
So I also am in Orange County Schools, and for the past 12 years, I've been at a school that have a more privileged population, and I'm now moving to another school as their math coach. So I'll be in more of a leadership position. And something that I saw at my former school was that we had a very large active parent community, but it was not fully representative of our student population. One thing in particular that the Spanish teacher held each Thursday night, or I don't think it was every Thursday night, maybe every other Thursday night, she would hold meetings on Zoom for the Latinx community, and would have different teachers present, and she would translate, and there was a lot of parent engagement and involvement in those meetings. And I just want to help parents have a better connection to our school community, especially going to my new school, and understand that, school is a place for everybody, and it's a community, and to bridge that gap between the school and the home, so that everyone feels connected and feels like they are valued at our school.
Sherry, something that you mentioned I think is very important is that for meetings held with families, they have to be linguistically appropriate. And so you have Spanish speakers, Turkish speakers, whatever is present in that community, you want to make sure not so much that your presentation is in that language, although that's important, but if you put earphones for translation, you break the dialogue thing. So your most precious people are the bilinguals that can bridge the families, so that a Spanish-speaking family says something and an English-speaking family responds, and somebody translates so that both understand, so that you're creating a dialogue among families. Because one of the things that's important is when we separate by language, we're also separating the community. And so the hardest task is to bring everybody together somehow. And so even though they say, well, it takes twice as long when you translate, well, it's not a matter of how much content you're going to cover, but how much dialogue and connection you have between families and the school. So I congratulate you on what that experience, and I hope that in your new assignment, something similar can happen.
And I have just one more quick thing that reminded me of is that, we think about the barriers to our family engagement as being language is one of them, but also, I like to push back on some of those concepts around language. One just being like, Spanish versus English, right? Is also the way that the terminology that we use, right? So even talking about parents, that's not inclusive in terms of the kinds of families that might be coming into our buildings, right? And the way that we communicate. And then also it doesn't get to that trust factor that's lacking. So we were working with a school in the South, and they were looking at their engagement numbers, and they actually had, decent engagement with their Spanish speaking families, but their Black families, right, were the ones that they engaged the least. And there wasn't a language barrier there, right? So they really had to kind of think about what might be causing that breakdown in communication, right? It's not based on language, it's a cultural barrier, right? And it's really something that we have to be honest about, taking on and understanding, like, how our different families, based on their community, their culture, like how those different things. Language is one area where we can definitely have a breakdown, but you can also have a breakdown based on race. You can also have a breakdown between your LGBT families and, in your school, right? So just thinking about in more than one level of barrier, I think is really important. And I also saw that O joined us from Orlando. Just wanted to say hello to you. I think you came on video for just one moment, but we just wanted to say welcome to you, and wanted to open if you had any additional comments.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Well, in reference to what Ms. Callaghan said, I'm a teacher in Orlando in the West Learning District, and we have a very, very high population of Creole families. And they are a family that leaves everything up to the teachers. When we have parent open house, meet the teachers, very rarely we get families because they have 2 or 3 jobs so that they can support their children's education. And it's very difficult to get these families involved. So what is it that we can do better to help our Haitian Creole families? I mean, we have a person who is in-house that reaches out to them for clothing and book supplies and everything. But the partnership is there, but they're not coming as much as we would want them to be involved.
Go ahead, Aurelio. What's your thought?
Well, I think, first of all, if you have somebody who's already a Creole speaker on staff, that's very helpful, and that's a key thing. But you actually start from a small number. With families that are most distant or least participatory, you don't want to have 30 warm bodies in the room next month and then talk to them. It's not going to happen. It's not just with the Creole speakers. This is across the line, all over the country. With families that are most distant or least participatory, you don't want to have 30 warm bodies in the room next month and then talk to them. It's not going to happen. It's not just with the Creole
maybe
speakers.
we could just mute ourselves if you're not speaking. I don't know. That might help. I don't know. Oh, that.
Wow, that was quite an echo. Okay, so let me go back. Would you please turn off your mics?
Okay.
I think somebody's connecting with the phone and the computer at the same time.
My phone is off. I'm not connecting with phone.
Can you mute yourself and just see if that?
I will. 1 second.
Try again.
Okay. Okay, so I would think about it more like establishing the critical mass of 5 to 7 people. So let's say you give yourself 3 months to do outreach by people that are Creole speakers and somehow connected to school. So if you get 2 or 3 people to then come together and discuss how they're going to do the outreach and have authentic communication with the families, and then start bringing them in. Because what you said about them not participating, I could say about Spanish speakers in South Texas. In other words, like there are reasons why families don't connect with an institution, and many times because the institution itself has had a negative connotation for them in their past. So families do care about the education of their children across the board. So that's the hook. And so start with 1 or 2 and have your goal that by the end of the month, you'll have 3 that come together at least once to have a conversation about how can we bring more families together to talk about what they want for the education of their kids. And a lot of times when the question is asked of some of these families, they say, well, nobody ever asked me before, and they'll be silent for a while. So it takes persistence and patience and a lot of love, because we're not talking about 30 warm bodies in the room to check off we had a parent meeting. It's about how we communicate with a community that has not had a positive relationship to this institution. So you start with a few, and if by the end of the semester you have 5, you've already had a huge success. But again, you're not bringing them in to tell them something. You're bringing them in to listen to them talk about their dreams and visions for their children, why they want their kids to get an education, whatever that opens up, because these have to be open-ended. It's a kind of a prairie-like approach where you have dialogue as the essence of it.
Thank you.
So we will open it up to, I think that everyone that has said that they were on has had a chance to speak. And if you haven't, please feel free to tell us a little bit more about where you are in your role. But we wanted this to be a question and answer session. So what other questions bring up or challenges are you all facing in your family leadership, family engagement work that we can talk about as a group? And I'm not going to say that we have answers, because we probably
Rosario, is your mic on? I'd like to hear from you. You just wrote a very positive note about me. Are you connected, Rosario?
That's why he wants to hear from you, Rosario, because you said something positive about him. That's why. It may just be on the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Also, there's somebody else, Ray Johnson. What do you do? I guess the mic doesn't work either.
That's okay. So feel free, the folks that can chat in, that's fine. Oh, hey, Ray's there.
There's Ray.
Good afternoon. I am currently in school for special education, mild to moderate. And I'm also a parent, and I'm also involved with the Judson ISD planning committee. So we just finished our big planning about how the money's going to be spent within the district itself, not just at one particular school, but throughout the entire district as a whole. So being part of that process was very enlightening. actually seeing the whole process of where the money's coming from, where the money goes, as far as improving things for the students at the school, such as internet, computers, getting transportation and everything out there to actually help the students. And just being part of that whole process was kind of a big eye opener, because we always sit back and we go, well, where's the money going? Well, where does the money come from? Where does the input from the parents come from? And that was one of the things that they tried to address and reach to us, is that us being, I think at each meeting was at least about a good 15 or 20 people in there. And the majority of them were either parents, plus you have the school faculty as well. But it was a chance for us to actually ask those big questions. Where's the money coming from? Where is it going? Can we get a detailed outline of who's getting what? And actually being told to take this information out into the community and let other people within the community know. So that was very enlightening in itself. And it made me look at things completely different as being a parent, as being getting involved in the whole process, and being able to just go out and tell everyone that I come in contact with, whether they're part of our school district or not, but you should really look into these types of things. So being in school to be an educator, and then actually being a parent, you see things completely different from two sides. For me, this whole experience today and tomorrow is just a stepping stone of information for me to actually take with me and further improve how I can help the community as it is already. So it's been very enlightening and uplifting just listening to some of the conversations, and especially dealing with how to reach people, because I agree with you 100%. It's not whether you get 31 or 32, it's whether you reach one or two people. If you get one or two people, you've done a great job. Those one or two people will actually start spreading the word, and then we'll start getting more involvement by mouth versus constantly putting out emails, flyers. Because I'll be honest with you, a lot of that stuff we don't check. If the papers come home, the kids don't give it to us. Next thing you know, we see it in the garbage, and the event was like 2-3 days ago. Like, where did this come from? So it's more or less basically, like you said, face-to-face involvement, or just at least reaching out to one person. I mean, if we had teachers this year during the pandemic that actually went to students' houses that weren't showing up on class on Zoom calls. So they actually went to the houses, knocked on the doors, and checked on them. If we actually had more teachers that had that type of oomph and would want to get involved, I think that would make a big difference within the whole thing itself.
Ray, how did you get onto that committee? How did that happen?
Well, one of the directors of the committee is a member of our church, and I'm also one of the ministers for the youth. And they simply just asked, hey, would you like to be part of this committee? I was like, sure, why not? And then there was another committee that had opened up, and they had asked my wife if she wanted to be part of it. And she was like, sure, why not? So she's been involved with Judson ISD for at least, about 2 years. So this would be my first year. This is her second year being part of the committee. And for those that don't know, my wife is Dr. Paula Johnson.
Wonderful. But I think you raised
my
a good
condolences,
point.
Ray.
Oh yeah, we love Dr. Johnson.
No, Ray.
It raises a good point, right? I was going to say that we're talking about this committee, and that is a structural practice that is embedded in a way that you are going that the ISD is going to be able to receive this feedback. And that's something that they've put in. It's not an ad hoc. It's not because there's an issue, right? This is the kind of mechanisms that we're talking about creating to institutionalize some of these approaches, right? So a parent, student, faculty committee, right? A lot of folks have these. But if you don't have them, right, making sure that those things exist and making sure that they do active outreach, right? To be able to reach families like yours, right? You kind of got involved by happenstance, which is great, but we want folks out there in those communities, that need to be reached. And I think that, part of our equity conversations that we got to be comfortable having is being able to say, we're not reaching our Black families, right? Like we're doing these things. We want to hear from all families, right? But our Black families, our Spanish speaking, our Creole speaking, our whoever, right, low income families, right, are not coming to the table. And let's do some specific things to make that happen. I think oftentimes when we're in these positions, we want to make sure we're reaching out to everybody, but part of our equity analysis is understanding that people need different things because they have different levels of comfort and different levels of trust. We'll be honest, right? Different levels of trust in their schools, right? And so I think that part of it is making sure we have those things involved and having them institutionalized. And the other piece just that I wanted to mention is that analysis of stuff like budget, some of the things that are the most important people know the least about, right? So your like school district's budget is one of those things where you look at it, it's a bunch of numbers. Most folks, even advocates, right, like aren't necessarily looking at those things, but it is one of the most important things for you to understand about how your child education is going to work. So I think we always are advocating for more participatory budgeting processes in the school districts we work with, making sure that budgets, things like hiring, things like, diversity, or where to go if there's an incident, right, related to discrimination, like all those different kinds of policies are the most important. But if I ask you right now, where in the school handbook do you go if you experience racial discrimination? Most folks are going to say, I don't know. Right. So like, I think we also have to be like a little bit selective about, we know some of these things from an equity lens that are going to impact certain groups more. Let's make sure we put the information in front of them. So just wanted to, uplift that as well. Any other questions? Thank you for that.
A little side comment to Ray. Raising teenagers is a piece of cake, right? Easy to do.
I think he will nod from. So let's see. Rosemary just put a comment in here. So you all host listening sessions and family fun nights. And have, much of her work has been focused on translation and interpretation and trying to move away from that to reimagine family engagement work. I mean, I think thank you for sharing that, that emphasis. And it's not like Aurelio mentioned, there's nothing wrong with those kinds of engagements, right? So because we're not focusing on that, we're not saying that you shouldn't be doing those kinds of family nights and listening sessions, right? But we're talking about something that's a little different, that takes it's a decision that folks must make, that this is the way that we want our parents involved. Because you can get a lot of what you need from those engagement nights and those surveys you send out or the parent-teacher conferences. You could probably get, 75% of the information you need, maybe, I don't know, that might be high. You can get a lot of information that you might need, right? But focusing on family leadership is the way that gets you to a culturally sustaining school environment, right? A culturally, responsive school, right? A school that's focused on equity. Like, these are the steps that you got to take to move beyond some of those things. And it's not anyone's fault, right? Like, oftentimes when we're talking about these policies, we're not blaming the folks who put the policies in place, but they exist and they're barriers, right, to moving forward in a more equitable fashion. And they're going to stay there until we change them. So that's one of the reasons why we like to focus on the policy and practice piece of this, because it is a way to keep that momentum moving forward and take you beyond just the engagement. Hi, Rosario. I see you came on the video. Hello, welcome.
Hi, I was able to figure it out. Yeah, so I think, seeing Rosemary's comment here and then thinking back to what O was saying, I was wondering if you all do have any guidance provided through the education cafes around translation and interpretation. So I am coming from TNTP. We advise districts throughout the country, and I'm TNTP, the New Teacher Project. And I'm coming in as a director of policy, specifically looking at what are we doing for our English learners and our immigrant students. And I know that family engagement is critical to that, right? Because when we think about our English learners, it's often that they don't have the advocates and champions who are consistently talking about and uplifting their needs. And we know that these families care deeply about their education. There's so much evidence to that. But when they are experiencing those barriers, including language barriers, it's really hard. And I hear Rosemary and what she's saying about like focus is going to just translating and interpreting. So, and it matters to have the cultural brokers, right? The bilingual staff who can come in and directly connect with families. But when districts are just starting to build up their capacity, is there any guidance that you all provide there?
I sent you a note. I think one-on-one work with you over time might be useful because everything depends on what you have locally and who you're working with. It's hard. There's no silver bullet. There's no easily repetitive things. For one reason, we don't have a written curriculum is because we see it as process. But I would love to keep on working with you, Rosario. Just stay in contact with us in issues, because as issues come up, any recommendation I make or anything we would recommend, it's going to be based on what you have, what your reality is. What is true is that if your staff spends time establishing authentic communication and relationships, it blossoms from there. In other words, that's where it happened. And any attempt to have a multilingual dialogue can happen if you build it up slowly, so that I don't see a rush to have numbers, but rather the quality of the relationships. And beyond that, that's why, Rosario, over time, if we can talk about it, there might be some things we could help you with or ideas. But you've got a fairly common difficult situation. It's challenging because institutions aren't used to dealing with these kinds of issues.
Right. Right. Well, thank you so much. I'll definitely connect one off then.
Where are you located again physically? What town? Where?
I am in New York City, but grew up in the South, in North Carolina, and taught in the Rio Grande Valley. So very much care deeply about those communities and have worked with them and see the way that, immigrant families are showing up in the best ways that they can for their kids.
You're a little bit north of Dallas, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's interesting, even the way that we think about the assets of those families. So as you may know, in Texas, we were just involved in some, legislative advocacy, getting the terminology changed from English learner, right, to emergent bilingual. And so thinking about even the way that we think about the assets that those families brings, the culture that those families bring, it's really important. But yeah, I mean, we do have a finite amount of resources and time and people, right? So I think that, oftentimes when we are looking at, that's one of the reasons why budgets are so important, is that, when we often hear, oh, we don't have the money or we don't have the time, it's like, that's not necessarily true. What is true is that we prioritize other things over this thing that we need, right? And so we always think of some of those limitations as just opportunities to change what the priorities are that we're expressing, either through the funding or through the time allocations, right? There may be some things that we're doing that aren't promoting equity. There may be some things that we're doing in other spaces that aren't helpful for our students. And we have to have a mechanism to examine those things, right? And institutionalize our responses to them. And we know that folks are going to hop on and off. You all have access to IDRA's page. You've got our webinar. I mean, not our webinars. Our what are these things called? Handouts. Our infographics for our information. And then please feel free if you need to hop off. We understand. Also, hope some of you all ate lunch. I know this was the lunch hour, so I hope you all actually ate. Yes, go ahead. Keep going, Aurelio. We have more time.
I want to touch on a different point. Is Rosario still on board or did she leave? One of the language issues, the nuances of language that's very important that you face is, for example, Spanish speakers are the largest language group in terms of recent immigrants or other language groups in this country. There are obviously many others, but even within Spanish speakers, when you are in South Texas, you were used to that most of them were Mexican or Mexican American, but that's changed because of the Central American influx. And in New York, you have to be also quite attuned to the nuances of a Mexican speaking Spanish to a Puerto Rican, to a Cuban, to a Central American. In other words, you really have to be attuned to the nuances and differences so that when people communicate with each other, there's obviously a common language for them. But it's just like the people in Southern Louisiana who speak a French-based language, an old one, which would be very different to Creole. In other words, like just because something is based on one language, the nuances of the local communities you have to be very attuned to it. And the only people that really understand it are the ones that speak it. So bringing that together and having that kind of dialogue is kind of a difficult, sensitive thing, but you still have to attempt it. How can we get people to understand each other and talk to each other, but not assume because they're all Spanish speakers are going to speak the same form of language, of Spanish. Did we lose a lot of people? I can't hear you, Terrence. Is your mic
Oh,
off?
I'm so sorry. Yes,
Okay.
I was talking on mute. You would think after all this time that we would learn, but no. I don't know how many folks we still have. It doesn't show us, but that's okay. Were there any other questions or reflections or even thoughts from the other sessions that you all attended that you'd like to, talk about from a family engagement perspective? And if not, that's okay. But
I just want to thank.
Chris, something you were talking about earlier, Chris, I wanted to have a conversation. I literally talk about it.
I heard someone trying to come through on their mic,
okay,
and I don't know if it was.
No, that was just me. I was just thanking.
Oh, that was you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was just thanking you guys. But go ahead now. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you how you handle the educational jargon with special needs. That's always been a challenge with our families.
Yeah. So the first thing is it's something that we did early on with our family engagement group was we actually did kind of a tutorial on this is what all the acronyms are. This is what this means. One of the other things that we did that we just actually got it kind of worked in and now it's going to be sustained forever is that when any of our new families come to our programming, we're providing them with a binder that has in there all the acronyms, all the definitions, what everything means, a place for them to keep notes, a place to keep their student folders, helpful hints that other family members have shared. And then that binder becomes kind of something that they hold on to as they progress through having services. So everything's in one place at one time, has resources for other community engagement events, what have you. So it's great, but the challenge is still having 1,500 employees, getting them to understand that when you're in a meeting with a family, you have to take the time and the opportunity to explain what the acronyms are, or don't use the acronym, use the, individual education plan, not IEP. And it's really coaching from there. It's our administrators kind of seeing that it still happens. And then afterward, kind of saying to the staff, did you recognize that you used that acronym about 10 times? Did you tune into the body language of the family that at one point their eyes kind of rolled back, like you could see they were overwhelmed? So now it's really coaching and trying to get our staff to kind of tune in on certain things. And that's going to take us a long time. It's going to be a continual process of improvement. The big thing for us is it's a journey, And the great thing is our families that are now strong partners with us, they understand it's a journey too. But we're committed to kind of work together and keep working through it. And hopefully, we're hoping that it becomes more contagious, that more families jump on board. And because there are a lot of families out there that they maybe had past experiences that weren't positive. They met a lot of resistance, with other schools or administrators. They maybe had to call an attorney, and there was some litigation. So sometimes families are like, is this real or is this fake? Because this wasn't my experience in the past. So we have to kind of say, yeah, this is real. But also, we're not always going to agree. There are going to be times when we're going to disagree, but that's okay. As long as we keep the child at the focus, we're going to keep working together to try to figure it out. But it's the relationship is so much better. The partnership's so much better. And we saw during COVID-19, when we had a shift at one point to all virtual instruction, our parents became the teachers at the homes. We needed the parents to partner with us, because when you have a child with a disability in the classroom, we have staff that help to keep the kids engaged and are sitting right there. At home, we need the parents to do that. So that really was huge, and really helped us to provide really good instruction, or the best instruction we could during that virtual time frame.
So, just to add what you were talking about, rest assured that in the new training of the teachers today, that is one of the biggest issues that they bring out when you're in ARD meetings, talking about keep it simple, use terms that the parents are familiar with. It like you said, it's almost like it's over their head. So the minute they hear ARD meeting, they're like, oh, we got to go in here again. We got to sit. We got to listen to all this terminology. And if the student is in there, they're just like looking around at everybody just talking like, I'm sitting right here. And so
I'm here, right here.
you're talking about me. So it's but rest assured that the program that I'm going through now, that is one of the things that they push, is that you make sure that you have communication and a relationship with the parent, not just well, we're here for the meeting. Here's a couple of notes. This is what you should do, and let's just walk out. It's completely different. Completely different.
Ray and Chris, one of the challenges beyond, let's say you have a successful ARD meeting. The meeting goes well, the parent participates, is respected, and a plan is developed. Then the next step is, how do you know that the teacher adapted her or his teaching approach to the needs of that child? And I know some families we were working with had that question, and some actually went and tried observing what was going on in their children's classroom. This is before COVID, because they said, well, the plan looks good, but I don't know if the teachers are adapting to the needs of my child. One question came up during COVID, for example, was that some children with special needs loved working on the computer. Others, the virtual education, they could not handle it. In other words, they needed to have face-to-face instruction. So families got very much aware of not just children with special needs, but across the board, that the learning styles of children vary a lot. And for some, virtual education works, and for others, it's a total flop. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and you're right. And we service a large population of children with autism, and we were actually surprised that some of the children with autism were more engaged by working through the computer screen than they would if they were sitting in the classroom. And it was shocking to us, because we thought, oh my gosh, the screen's going to be on, and in 30 seconds we're going to lose their attention. They're going to be running and finding something else to do.
No, they were
they actually were hyper engaged that this person's talking on the screen, which was amazing to us. But you're right. For some students, it worked out really well. And now, what we're trying to do is you now have another tool that could be effective in engaging kids. Even if they come into school, you can manipulate the environment to utilize a computer and a screen if that, hey, whatever works, right? If it works, keep doing it. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the real challenge, is like the resistance to going back to anything that we did during the pandemic. Like, no, wait, some of that stuff actually worked. Like, let's not totally get away from some of those things. We mentioned some of the engagement strategies of going out into communities and like finding the students that weren't there. What would that be like if we did the same thing, not from missing Zoom class, but from missing actual class? Like just we have to try not to go back to everything as it was before, because it wasn't equitable then. So just very good points.
But one thing you said about parents or families feeling comfortable about what's going on in the classroom is really important, and that was a challenge at our agency, because for many years the classroom was off limits to families, and past administration made all kinds of, reasons why. Well, the kids are going to be distracted because there's other adults in the room, and the adults are going to interfere with the instruction. So what happened is a mistrust built. So parents were saying, you don't want us in there because you're doing things that are potentially harmful to our children, or you're not following, what you should be doing. And new leadership comes in, and we said, you got to open your doors, go let the parents in. And it's an opportunity to connect with the families, and also an opportunity to have the families see what you're doing and how you're working with their children, that then when they go home, they can reinforce those skills. So it's a benefit to the child. And you shouldn't be afraid that if the family is in there and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you shouldn't be afraid of a family coming in there and seeing it. But if you don't do this, you're going to create this mistrust, and it's going to cause you more problems in the future. So, but it was, we still have some kind of weeds out there that really still kind of fight this and resist it. But initially, oh my gosh, you would have thought we were asking people to give their left arm and their right leg to do this, and it was just, trust us, we'll get through there. But it has connected our families and our staff closer together, and has increased the trust, which is important.
That's awesome. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, jaded opinions, anything?
Institutional change takes time. Chris, if you have a teacher who's been teaching for 30 years, she's not going to change easily.
Agreed. Sometimes 5 years, they don't change.
And as you were saying, you would think you were asking him to give the left arm, and you just said, "Hey, let the parent take a peek in your classroom." How's that going to be so radical?
Yeah.
Actually, as a high school teacher, I found when I started getting parents in as resources to talk about stories of the neighborhood, stuff like that, it was great because they had resources and experience that was so important that they shared. But my peers, the other teachers, really didn't like that I was doing that.
Yeah. Well, and right, you have people that bring in different interests, expertise that contributes to, making you better and more opportunities for the children. So you're really kind of limiting yourself if you don't open up that opportunity, because at the end of the day, it could be a gift, something that comes about.
Yeah, and I think it's important. We always try to, we're very student centered at IDRA, but also just thinking about what this experience is like for the educators, right? Like thinking about, yes, we want you to give high quality instruction. We also want you to find a way to go into the community. We also want to find a way to interact with the parents in a different way and develop a relationship with them too. It's like, I think that we should have these expectations, but we should also provide the corresponding support, and also realizing that, like our teachers is kind of like our schools, right? Our schools had to be places where we fed students, educated students, gave them shelter, like maybe there are some different ways that we can go about how we structure our education in order that, folks can do all the things that we require of them. They have the resources. And not, the school doesn't have to do everything, right? Like, what are the other partnerships in the community that we can, bring to bear for some of these? That's one of the things we like about education cafes, is that it is also connected through a community-based organization that has also got resources that are working on other things to benefit those parents, right? How can we bring in those community resources to do things to lighten the load on those educators a little bit? But I think it's still something that we should encourage, expect, and try to facilitate making happen. So wonderful. Other thoughts?
I was thinking, Ray, with your youth ministry, you could actually facilitate some intergenerational projects with students and parents talking about school so that their voices are heard. I think you've got an opportunity there.
Yeah, the intergenerational piece is really huge, and it's hard for us to do because our students, the way that they've been engaged, I think that we've just seen it. And I know that even back when Aurelio started doing this, the students were engaged. So don't let me say this is a new phenomenon, right? Students have always been engaged in kind of civil rights work. But we've seen a lot of energy in the past couple of years around a lot of different things, whether it's school policing, whether it's even the curriculum, right? Teaching the truth in our schools. And so figuring out the ways to appeal to those students while also talking to their parents and figuring out the ways to bring them together. We've education cafes are useful because they are intergenerational and they create those spaces. I think one of the other folks on the call, I think Minnie, was talking about creating spaces, and you don't often, like have a space like that you can work together in those projects on, and it's everyone's equal in those environments, right? That's what we're trying to create. So something else to think about.
So with that, Aurelio, we with my group, we meet virtually, and I think we're going to actually go back to face here next month. But dealing with the parents, I have an open door policy. So at any point in time, you can come in to the call, you can come into the virtual room and see what we're doing and ask questions. My phone number is given to everyone. So if you want to contact me directly, you can. I don't have any problems talking to you about what's going on in the classroom, if we have any issues with the child or anything like that. And I think that just having that basis as me as a person is going to help me when I actually go out into the classroom itself, because I'm still going to take that same thing with me no matter where I go. So when I finally do get picked up by one of the school districts here in San Antonio, I will be one of those teachers that you will have my personal phone number. You will have my personal email. Anytime that you have a question about what's going on, or if you want to come to the classroom to see what's going on in the classroom, I have an open door. All you have to do is just let the front desk know that you're here to see Mr. Johnson. You want to go to the classroom, and they just need to walk you up. I'm not going to say, well, we can't at this time, or I don't have the time to actually have this happen, because at that point, you're putting up a wall and you're creating a distrust at that point in time. The minute you say no is the minute they start going, well, what you really doing then? And I don't want to have that type of relationship with the parent. And so anything that I do, I'm open book with it. It doesn't matter what it is. If you want to know, just ask me, and I'm just going to flat out tell you. So with what Chris was saying with the technology with the student, for me, I've seen it depends on the spectrum that the child is on, really, because you have some that responded really well with the computer going face to face, and then I've had an experience where they were doing better in person than they were at home because they needed that interaction with the teacher to make sure to put them back on pace for what they were doing. So it goes either way at that point in time when it comes to the technology with the special education students. But one of the things that I noticed, and I was kind of worried about myself, was a lot of them have to have in the classroom that extra support. and being at home, they weren't getting that support. So that was one of the things that made me wonder about that. And so I was like, well, if they were getting support at home and now not at home, but at school, now they're at home, where's the support coming at that point? So then, we found out that some were actually having meetings once a week virtually, just to, spend some time with the student, maybe 5-10 minutes or so, just to say, hey, how you doing? And check up on them, make sure that they're keeping up. But it's the face-to-face is necessary for some, and then some can actually do the virtual. But I'm with Chris, whatever works. Just make sure you keep doing it. So that is what I've taken out of most of this. Everything that I'm picking up today that I'll get tomorrow is just going to improve me for when I actually do get in the classroom. And I can't wait. I really can't. I'm looking forward to it. I really am.
Very, very exciting.
Yeah, and I was reading Samantha's comment. I like it. I think it's ridiculous that a parent wouldn't call back even after you make a phone call, or a teacher wouldn't call back. I mean, that's really upsetting to hear. And I mean, I know it's for our programs, working with children with disabilities, we encourage daily communication either in writing to the families or on a weekly basis, touching base via phone call. And that's kind of our procedure to do that. So growing up in the world of special education, I could not imagine not at least having 1 or 2 phone calls a year with a family member about their child, at least like a voice call. So it's really upsetting to hear that the teacher wouldn't call back. Yeah, you're right.
There's something about how we're trained as teachers, or at least we're trained in the past, was that we were taught a lot about pedagogy and the content and almost nothing about family communication and connection with families. You learn it, in the act, you learn it. And if you're surrounded by people that don't like that kind of communication or are threatened by it, the older teachers tell us, don't worry about it. You just do your job. Be the English teacher you're supposed to be, and don't worry about the family. They don't speak English anyway. It's that kind of stuff.
Right. And it's like, I feel like it's family engagement as it's compliance. Like, oh, I have to set up these parent-teacher meetings, or I have to, do this as another requirement, not as an added benefit to the kind of instruction that I could provide to these students. So.
And when you do it like that, Terrence, you just have a pro forma event and check off, okay, had parent meeting, boom, out of the way,
Yeah, and I just find that, and we have a pretty large mental health department here, and I find that very dangerous, because when children engage in behavior in the classroom, a lot of people interpret that behavior right away as deliberate. But sometimes when you reach out and you have the conversation with the family, you find out there's some backstory, that there might be something emotional going on. And that kid's behavior is them communicating, I need somebody to talk to. I'm struggling. I'm having a tough time. And today, oh my gosh, our children and what's going on in our society are probably so confused and so split at times that they need sometimes people to talk to and help them through some of these tough issues. And we have to be more aware. And where you're going to get that information is more and more communication with families, the child, and those relationships. That's where those things will come out. And then we could better support our children to be kind of mentally and emotionally healthy at the same time. So.
With teachers who have children, especially who have teenagers, a lot of times all you have to do is tell them, what about your children? Are they a handful or not? Is what school tells you about them true about your children? There's like, when you start asking, like Ray, when Paula and I we're in a conversation about the children, that each one is unique and different. Even identical twins are different,
Exactly.
And so the judgment of a teacher or a school with her or his view of the child in the classroom needs to be somehow connected with how the parent has experienced that child at home. You know, and just, you know, one of the things that at IDRA we've experienced over a long period of time is we do a lot of teacher training. And we've seen over the last 40 years that teacher training has improved because they've used principles of andragogy, effective teaching of adults, which means that you draw on the experience of the learner, you have dialogue, you don't have too much lecture, you have participation. When we think about parent involvement, we just apply those same principles. Because just like when you are a teacher in a professional development session, you want to be heard, you don't want to be lectured to for a long period of time, you don't want to be given that kind of stuff, you want to participate. You want your own experience to be validated. Well, that's what we're saying about parent meetings. Validate their experience, see what they bring to the effort. Because a single mom who's raising 3 kids certainly has a lot to say about what it takes to survive in that environment. And I have to listen to that and understand that that is an important experience, whether she has a GED or not.
Now, the one thing that I want everyone to think about, especially dealing with the parents, is not necessarily about the teacher getting in your business. That's not, let's get rid of that idea right away. We're trying to get an understanding of why the child is acting a certain way. We're not trying to get in your business. We just want to understand, did something happen that made them upset and it just carried on into school? We're not trying to get in your house. We're just trying to understand why the activity or the way that they're acting is happening here right now, because yesterday they were okay, but they came in this morning, they've got an attitude, they're all upset. What happened? Well, it could have been something as simple as he ran out of his favorite cereal this morning. He's going to be upset. Just a little heads up. We're not trying to get into what's happening behind the closed doors. It's just little minor things when you're dealing with the children. And then just keeping that, we're not trying to come into your house. We're just trying to make sure we have a relationship like, hey, we ran out of popcorn. He's going to be upset, just to let you know. That way you don't get a phone call from us because we don't have to send him out the room because he's too upset and can't calm down because he didn't get what he wanted this morning. So it's really not us trying to get your business. It's just the understanding, hey, just a little heads up would help.
And Ray, sometimes it is a big thing. If a child's beloved aunt is sick or something like that, there are many reasons. And if I don't know as a teacher that his mom's sister is in the hospital, and that's why the child is so disturbed, that's very important information, you know? So it can be a little thing like the cereal, or it can be a huge thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very, very, thank you for that comment, Ray. I think it's very important that we consider what are the way that we frame these conversations, right? From a place of love and concern, and from a place of, you know, wanting the student to have the best experience that they can have, and being able to communicate what's going on is crucial for that child's success. So I think we are out of time. Thank you. I see Samantha had another comment. Communication is expressing the vital importance. We appreciate you all for staying with us for all of this time. We hope that you all have learned some different things that might be useful for you in thinking about family leadership. And if any folks have any additional questions about education cafes or want to have some of these kinds of experiences in your own communities, please feel free to reach out to Aurelio and I would love to be supportive of you. And yeah, just our first name, last name at IDRA. I guess I'll put mine in here too. And with that, I don't think they're going to close us out. They may. Aurelio. So we just want to thank you and thank you for coming to the convening. Hopefully you all are getting great information. I know I've personally enjoyed all the sessions that we've heard thus far and hope that you will continue engaging with us. You can hear more from Aurelio and me tomorrow. We've got 2 sessions planned. So if you just want more of us, feel free to come check us out tomorrow at our sessions that we've got. So with that, Aurelio, did you want to have anything else?
Well, that I wore a tie for you guys today.
If you don't know Aurelio, you don't know how much of a big deal that is.
That's a big deal. Big deal.
So thank you all for sharing. It's wonderful to meet you all. We will catch up with you all soon.